Hello and welcome to Chess Vision's video lesson on basic tactical themes. A double attack is one of the most common tactical ideas in chess. Also known as a fork, a double attack happens when a single piece attacks two of our opponent's undefended or less valuable pieces, even if those pieces are defended. Weak points, such as vulnerable mating squares, or unprotected pawns, at the same time. This is different than a simple attack, when a piece attacks only a single target, piece, square, or pawn. The big difference between these two types of attack is that a simple attack is usually easier to defend against in most cases because it only creates one problem for your opponent to deal with, while a double attack creates double the problems for our opponents. It's always more difficult for our opponent to defend against two threats at the same time with only one move. In other words, a double attack creates double the worries. Every piece can create a double attack. The first step to finding a double attack is to take a moment to examine the position and look for targets that we mentioned earlier. An exposed king, or potential mating squares around the king, or an undefended back rank, any undefended pieces and pawns, and attacks against less valuable pieces, even if those pieces are protected. So let's start by looking at a few examples of it. In this position, we can notice that the white king is exposed to an attack by the black rook. In addition, both of white's pieces, the knight and the bishop, are unprotected. How could you create two attacks at the same time? Rook c3. This attacks both the undefended bishop and knight. There's no way for white to defend both pieces with just one move. So on the next move, black will capture a piece no matter how white proceeds. Bishop c5. You still have to be a little careful because the bishop is defending the knight on a3, so black will just simply capture the bishop. If knight c2, black has to be careful about choosing which piece to capture, so always look for an unprotected piece. Rook takes c2. Let's look at another example. Here's another example where white can create several attacks. Let's make a quick list. The black king is exposed. That means he can be attacked on the next move. The bishop is unprotected on b8, and the pawn is not protected, but it is a threat because it's very close to promotion. This is important to note since any move we play, we should consider our opponent's potential threats as well. So how should white proceed? Rook e8 check. White can safely capture the bishop using a double attack, but only after he's noticed that he can also stop black's pawn. Hopefully you saw the next maneuver to stop the pawn from promoting. King g7, rook takes b8, g2. Now the only move to stop the pawn is rook b1. Notice that if the white king would have been on b1, c1, or d1, the black pawn would have been unstoppable because this would have blocked the rook. So white should have refrained from winning black's bishop earlier. So king g6, rook g1, and white will capture the pawn on the next move. Another example. Again, before looking for a move, look at the position and make a list of targets. The black king is exposed. That means he can be attacked. He also, because of the white king position, the black king is trapped on the back rank. So checkmating threats are an idea on several of the squares along the 8th rank. The bishop on b3 is unprotected. So, after rook c5, the double attack is against an unprotected piece and an empty square, c8. But because the square is on the back rank, it threatens checkmate, and the king will have to move, and rook takes c3. Another example of a double attack is when a weaker piece can attack more valuable pieces. In this example, the black bishop and the knight are vulnerable to an attack by a pawn. Anytime a pawn can attack a piece, this should be considered a threat, because the pawn is the weakest piece on the board. If you can trade it for a piece, you've won material. After white plays e4, even though the pawn can be captured, white wins material. For our last example, let's look at a game where a double attack wins material. Black plays queen f6, and this is a mistake, but it's not so easy at first glance. While the queen seems to defend the unprotected knight on b6, do you notice that the knight on b6 will remain undefended after a trade of queens? So how can white take advantage of this? A rook on d6 would attack the queen and the knight, but the queen is in danger right now. So the rook move isn't possible. So queen takes f6, which white creates two new undefended targets on f6 and h6. Now the pawn on f6 and the knight on b6 are unprotected, but still, if rook d6, then the black will simply capture the knight on e5. And there's been no gain. So the best move here is to play knight g4, attacking both of the undefended pawns. Black's only move to defend the pawns is king g7. Knight takes f6. This capture is only possible because of the unprotected knight on b6. King takes f6, rook d6, and white is one material. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this introduction to basic double attacks. Visit www.lessons.chessvision.net for additional training materials and videos and lessons.